I like to be presenting way long before, but for several reasons I couldn't. But now it's happening, so very excited. So today, let me share my screen actually because I wasn't sharing anything. Can you see my screen now? Should take.
Yes, we can.
Cool. So before I dive into the details of this session, here are some of my contact details. If you want to reach out to me, please feel free. Here's my email address, LinkedIn profile, Twitter handle, and there's something new as well, which I created a dedicated account for the product or the project, which has its unique personality, as you can see. But yeah, feel free to get in touch if you have any questions about this session. So the agenda for today is basically I'm going to cover kind of the history of this project as well, and the kind of evolution and what's going to happen next. So the roadmap and some of the statistics and some of the in previous presentations about FakeXrmEasy, I was always talking about the why. Why should be using unit testing at all? And in previous presentations, as always, showing like a funny video about someone fixing a bug in production. And this time, basically, I did something a bit more formal as well, which I did. So I did a research study. It took actually a couple of months to complete, which puts some actual, value measured into the project, so that I can just go and check and see. Then we would see the roadmap as well, what's coming new, and and if depending on time, hopefully I have time because I have lots of things to share as well. I'll be talking about how you could do, for example, unit testing with Azure Functions against Dataverse, and then some questions and answers at the end. So basically, what's the story of FakeXrm? Yeah, and basically, to be honest, this was a project that I started like in 2014 in November. Actually, by the way, next week is going to be the 7th anniversary. So yeah, time flies. But anyway, in 2014, basically started working on this project as something really to start to learn how to use GitHub. I never used Git before, and it was actually my first project on GitHub. And given that I had to learn how to use GitHub, I was thinking, well, maybe I could do something useful as well for me as a developer, and that could also help other developers as well. And at that point in time, we had kind of a struggle or discussion on the team, because some people were pushing towards clean code and unit testing as a best practice. Then on the other hand, we had developers that were not so keen on that. They thought, unit testing is something very difficult. Why should a unit test my code for a small piece of code that runs in a plugin? And so we had that kind of funny discussions. And then I had the idea basically of thinking, maybe this is too difficult because there's so much things happening on the Dataverse side of things that it was making unit testing very difficult to start with. And it was not friendly for newcomers to the platform as well, because they had to learn something from scratch almost. So someone like a .NET developer probably had to read through a not small SDK documentation and so on. So then basically I started working on that project on 2014, and the more time I was spending on that, the more time I was convinced myself that was hugely useful. I was like, how come no one think about this before? So, and then in 2015, I founded Dynamics Valley Company as a consulting company, which is based in Spain, to offer kind of, consulting and projects as well. But also with that kind of mindset, just pushing off about quality and things like that as a differentiator. Then, in 2017, I got 2 MVP awards as well, mostly because of my open source work, I guess. And then in 2020 and this year is when I started working on FakeXrmEasy version 2, which has a big changes coming. But basically, this is the version that I started when Microsoft announced the CTS Service Client back in February 2020. So this is the version I'm going to publish after this session, hopefully, and see. So basically, that's the latest version that is coming up soon. And that idea that might have been crazy about implementing a query engine from scratch that runs in memory, so you don't have to actually connect to Dataverse to build your code. It was a kind of a game changer, because 7 years later, that idea was turned to be actually quite useful, because they're having 1.5 million downloads of this package. If you look at the number of downloads, for example, of the CRM SDK, it has like 8 million. So this is roughly like 20%. So I'm really proud of this, and I want to also thank all the contributors like Betim, who spent time on their spare time to contribute to create pull requests and improve the project. And yeah, this is something I honestly never thought of it could happen, but yeah, I'm really proud. So then we conducted basically as a research study, as I was saying before. There was developers who actually seen this was useful were starting to use this project, but maybe all these issues that we face as developers probably are hidden from the top management of companies. So this was an effort of try to stop and think and put a measure about the value this brings to the companies. So that study, first of all, thank you for all the people who responded to this study. This is a study I sent to 32 developers from 30 different organizations, from different countries and of different sizes. And we wanted to measure the quantified benefits and unquantified benefits. And the outcome of that study was basically that people using FakeXrm, so the current version of FakeXrm, which is version 1, in that study we asked that people how many, for example, time they were spending on bug fixes, how much time they were spending on tasks, and then compare the results before and after using FakeXrmEasy. And the outcome of those figures basically came as something really crazy, which is that 191% increased efficiency due to the reduction of escape defects. And what is a escape defect? So escape defects are things that are supposed to be catch during the development phase, but for some reason we didn't test it properly, or basically those are issues that ended being deployed to later phases after development. So for example, they were found during the testing phase, or worst case scenario, they were found in production after deployment. So when we compare the responses of people using FakeXrmEasy before using it and after using it, this was the result. And it's crazy because when you need to fix escape defects, it's not just the developer who needs to fix those, but also the whole team. So that's why, how can this be even bigger than 100%? Is because it's not just the developer, it's the developer, it's the functional tester who is testing it, is the first level line of support, third level line of support who needs to spend time fixing all these issues. That's why when we measure this relatively to the developer's point of view, it can be bigger than 100%. And also, not just the defects, because as Betim was showing before, he was able to develop plugins without ever hitting the database environment. And what that means is basically before FakeXrm or similar tools, you had to make a change, deploy it to the database environment, test everything is working properly. If something is not working properly, you need to find out why, and that probably means adding log traces. And that process was repeated over and over and over again, and it was really time consuming. So now this has changed because I'm just working locally. I built my plugin or code activity. I can debug it locally, and once I'm happy, then I put source control, and then a automatic deployment runs, like for example using the XRM CA framework by Hamsi, and then I'm done. Huge time saver as well. So this is again, if you have any questions, please drop me an email. I won't go through everything because it's massive, and I'm already spending like 10 minutes. But basically, the idea of the research study was to measure the time before and after. As you can see, the two boxes at the top, the one in blue is the time spent on bug fixes, and the second one from the top is in green, is actually the time where we could use FakeXrm, because when we break down developers' time, you can be doing something else. Like, for example, I'm working on a project on entity framework, and I cannot use FakeXrmEasy there. Fine, we don't count that time, obviously. Or I'm working on a flow, or I'm working on other things that are not just using, for example, the organization service. So we don't count that time, obviously. But this is basically the approach we did. And that 191% came mainly from this study. I don't know if you have seen this study before, but this is a study from IBM, System Science Institute study, that basically, says that, finding a subject effect on the maintenance phase, and maintenance is anything that happens after production, can be up to 100 times more expensive compared to the design phase. And finding those software effects during the development phase could be 6.5 up to 6.5 times more expensive than doing it in this during the design phase. And so, because FakeXrmEasy is a tool used by developers, we measured that worst case scenario relative to the development phase. So that was basically the relative cost of fixed software effects relative to the development phase. It could be up to 15 times more expensive. And those are basically the main figures that drive the research study. But also we come up with some unquantified benefits. So these are the feedback from the actual people, like many developers who are using the Dataverse project, and some quote, for example, from Ben, who used to work from one of the highly respected UK university. He said that now that I discovered this way of working, I will never go back to writing code without unit tests. And someone else as well who works with for a central bank, he said that it helps us massively with code coverage and allows us to hit all of our KPIs alongside the rest of our engineering practice. And also a principal architect said, I find bugs almost instantly now rather than with other methods. So it was a kind of a game changer. But also we ask people, how do they think about FakeXrmEasy? And 80% of the people who responded to the survey, they say that they love really FakeXrm. And 20% of that people, they love it so much that they would quit their jobs if they had to do all of that ever again without unit tests. So if you're a manager, please be careful. So now that was kind of the study, and I already used the 15 minutes that I thought I could spend on that, so that's going well. So now the roadmap, what's coming next? And I'm very, very excited about this as well. So my idea was to release version 2, but because, when Microsoft announced the CDS Service Client back in February 2020, that was announced in 2020, but it was, and actually I tried that version almost a week after, and it was working really well. To be honest, I was surprised. But the problem was that the package was marked as alpha, and it has been for alpha status, for almost a couple of months ago, and so I had to make a decision, and that basically, if I made this public, maybe people wouldn't be that much excited, because the main dependency is still an alpha status, and there are organizations who don't want to use, libraries that are in alpha. They want to be ideally versions that can be more stable. So I made a decision, which is that I exported whatever it was done for the CDS service client to make it work against the .NET framework, the full .NET framework, and that's version 2. And also because that CDS service client wasn't intended to support server-side development, then with version 2, you can still use the new middleware functionality that I'm going to talk about also for server-side development as well. And that's going to be handy, especially for customers who might be thinking to move to the cloud, but they are still on premise and they want to use this now. So version 2 will support the full .NET framework, and also we are going to release version 3. So version 3 will be a .NET Core only package that will depend on the Dataverse client, as you can see, and it will support the very latest functionality. For example, async support as well. But at the same time, we can have the two, versions into two different branches. So we can, for people who want to get their hands on DRT on the projects that are happening right now, and they need to do server-side development, they can use version 2 today when I'm publish the open source project. If they want to use the very latest functionality of version 3, which I'll show how it works later on, they could do that as well. But also that means maintaining two parallel versions is very time consuming. So we are kind of putting version 1 to rest and in maintenance mode. That means basically we will be fixing some of the bugs that we find in version 2, version 3 probably. And we will be merging the pull requests that were outstanding, which, by the way, were outstanding because version 2 and version 3 like a fork of version 1 with that point in time. And so we had to put those on hold because, trying to maintain pull requests while developing the new architecture would be crazy. So that's kind of the plan for after today, really. So for this year and whatever happens next. So which one should I use? So if you need to develop plugins, workflow code activities, Azure functions, using the version 1 runtime or any other CRM service client app, then version 2 is the way to go. If you are using any client application in .NET Core 3.1, including bespoke web portals, for example, like the one I demoed last time, or Azure Functions version 3 runtime and so on, then version 3 is the way to go. And what's the difference between the version 2 and version 3? Actually, the architecture is almost identical. It just changes that in version 3 we're introducing, the latest functionality from the database client. But from a point of view, architecture is almost the same. Now we are bringing .NET Core support. All the original repository has been broken down into several ones, as you can see: abstractions, core, messages, plugins, and code activities. And for each of these, now there is a sonar quality gate that will kick off before merging a pull request. And that was because we'd like to, keep all that code kind of code smells and things like that more or less standard across pull requests. And in version 1, for example, we had people who were pushing some code changes, and the style wasn't the same, so it was a mixture of different things. But anyway, so we are introducing these new packages, and also because there are the original version has been broken down into several packages. When you get access to the repositories, there will be also PowerShell scripts to facilitate building all these packages and dependencies locally, so you don't even have to wait for the GitHub action to complete, which is something that was handy for me, and I think it was handy for the maintenance point of view, because you can build something locally real quick. And because GitHub Actions take some time, especially now that we are offering cross-platform support, we are building it for multiple target frameworks, so it might take some time. So version 2 and version 3 come with a new middleware, and why why this was added. So in version 1, we had a one message execution per organization request, and now we have every request is going to be executed through a pipeline. And the reason was because if we wanted to introduce something like, for example, pipeline simulation, then the messages were coupled with that functionality, and everything was kind of just put into the one place, which was difficult to maintain and to extend. Because now difficult to extend. Because in the newer middleware we run organization requests through a pipeline, we can decouple the, for example, implementation of the messages to the pipeline simulation. And in future, we introduce a security package, for example, to be able to simulate the permissions. Then we can introduce that as a new package, and we don't have to touch any of the other existing packages. So it's decoupled. So what are these things that you can see on the middleware builder? The middleware builder basically has add methods and use methods. Add methods are the things that are needed by the use methods, and so the use methods define the actual pipeline sequence. So, for example, in this screenshot, when we create an entity that will run before the message, or some of the organization request messages, or in the other example, like this one, which is pipeline simulation. If we put pipeline simulation before CRUD and messages, that pipeline simulation now supports running plugins, for example, against the pre-create or pre-update messages, and will run as well the post messages after the CRUD messages and other messages. Might be a bit confusing, but basically with that structure, we can define exactly how it's going to be implemented and how it's going to be run. And it's also explicit. By looking at just the one place, and I see how this framework is going to work, as opposed to in the previous version, which was mostly a set of default implementation, and then you had to ask or see which parameters were set up and so on, and it was confusing, especially the support issues that people were having. But now by looking at this place, it's like, for example, ASP.NET Core, when you configure the pipeline execution, it's kind of the same idea. So as I was saying, in the couples implementation, we can configure the pipeline execution without affecting other packages. Makes the behavior explicit, because by just looking at the one place, we kind of get an idea of how is configured and set up. And it's configurable. You only set up what you need. If you don't need pipeline simulation, you just don't add it to the middleware, and just, for example, because you only want to unit test a plugin, for example. And it's sufficient in a way that, from the maintenance point of view, we now need to run the tests on each package only for the tests that need to change. So, for example, before we had, as Betty was saying, 1,800 unit tests in the one package. And if I needed to change, for example, a fake message implementation, there's no need. I need to run all the packages that are at the core level. So now basically I can do that. If I make a change to the fake message implementation, then I need to run the tests only for the fake message implementation. That's it, without messing about branch filters and things like that, for example, because it's structured on different repos and different packages. So I actually pretty good on time. So the last bit of this session is about unit testing as other functions. So and let me actually check if there are any questions so far. No, so I'm okay to continue, I guess. Yeah. Okay. So so unit testing Azure functions. This is something that has been requested for a while, and I won't go into the details of the Azure functions themselves and Dataverse, because there are plenty of videos on YouTube that you can search for, and they cover things like authentication, authorization, and things like that. For example, I just added two ones that I think are very, very good. One by Phil Cole and another one by Damian Raskin. Feel free to check them out. I won't go into details of the authorization, and for the purposes of this presentation, I'll be focusing on the unit testing side of things. So regardless of when you're developing Azure functions, you can choose different authentication methods. But regardless of which one you use, it's always a good idea to separate the authentication logic from the business logic. So always make your business logic depend only on the interfaces so that it can be unit tested properly. For example, if you use an Azure function to create a contact against Dataverse, for example, whenever you will receive a message from Service Bus, then the logic to create that contact can depend only on the iOrganization service interface or the iOrganization service async interface, which is new in the database client package. But then you just set up the initiation logic, the authentication logic at the beginning, but everything else can just rely on the interface. And so you can use dependency injection and things like that. So before going into the details, these are kind of the extensions I use as well. So for example, of course, because you're developing Azure functions, you need to install the Azure function extension, and that has a dependency to the Azure account and to the Azure resources, and those will be installed automatically. You don't have to install those. But also, because I'm just unit testing and I need some other extensions that I think are useful, I have the Text Explorer UI, which allows me to see all the tests on my right inside Visual Studio Code. It's not as powerful as Visual Studio Enterprise, but it's handy enough for me. Then the .NET Core Test Explorer, because the Test Explorer UI is this extension that allows you to display tests, and then that extension is able to display tests for multiple different languages. So you need to then install the extension for .NET Core Test Explorer. And then another one that I personally like as well is the Solution Explorer, because the Solution Explorer is a solution that allows me to just see the C# files in a solution. Sometimes it's handy because I don't want to see all the Markdown files or JavaScript or JSON, etc. And it's handy to focus just on those files as well. The things I like to structure the projects in the new way is using a folder structure like this one. So for example, you created the solution file at the top. As you can see, .NET New Solution, and you give it a name. But then I put the source projects into the source subfolder and then the test projects into a tests subfolder. That's a personal choice. You don't have to do it, but I like to do it. Then, in order to test an Azure function, once you have installed the Azure function, you can create a project and pick basically the C# runtime. You pick the version 3, the C# language, the version 3 runtime, because it's the one that supports .NET Core 3.1. There's an even newer version, which I didn't try yet, which is version 4 and supports .NET 6. But as far as I know, the Dataverse client, the baseline is .NET Core 3.1, so you could use it, but I didn't try it yet. Then you can basically, like any other Azure functions that you have developed previously, you choose a trigger, you give it a name, and then you specify the access rights if it's anonymous at the functional level, and so on and so on. Then you build the project so that it pulls all the dependencies, etc. And then you create then a unit test project. As you can see, the .NET New XUnit, and you give it a name. Once basically you have the two projects created, you using the Solution Explorer extension, you can add those by just right-clicking and add existing project easily to the solution. or then when you have the solution in place, you install FakeXrmEasy. Right now, you won't be able to install it because I didn't publish the latest version into NuGet. I'll do that at some point today, and you will be able to try. But once it's there on NuGet, because I was using GitHub packages, but once it's there on NuGet, you should be able to do it. And so you can, using the command line again, you can do .NET app package fakexrmeasy.core.v9 version 3. V9 is because it's targeting a Dataverse version V9 or later. And version 3 because it's the latest version that it uses the Dataverse client behind the scenes. And I'm installing the core package because for this very simple example, I don't need anything else. I don't need plugins. I don't need code activities. Everything was in version 1. Everything was put into one package. And one of the issues was also that the global namespace was being populated with things I didn't want. So now I can just install whatever I need, and then it will add extension methods that I need only for what I need at that point in time. So because in this case, I don't need to test any plugins or etc., then I am installing the core package. So once basically you have installed FakeXrmEasy, and if you had installed the .NET Test Explorer extension, we are in a position to start adding unit tests. So this is the thing I usually do is always start with the test first, even with a blank unit test, as you can see. So in this example, we just want to test that the Azure function should create a contact based on a couple of parameters it gets from the request. So I usually do something like this. And then, of course, in the source package, because we want to use the latest database client NuGet package, you need to install that as well. As you can see, .NET app package Microsoft.Python database client. And then now there are a couple of things you could test this. In this example, I'm just adding an internal method to the static class that the Azure function provides. But as things get complicated, you might want to refactor and move these things out into maybe a separate class or project where you can use proper dependency injection that I'm not using in this demo, but just something to consider. The things I'm just highlighting this as well because I like to use internal methods whenever possible because it's a way of having proper encapsulation as well. So the create contact logic in this case is something that happens internally in the Azure function. If this is a very simple example, but if I had this logic in a shared class library, for example, I didn't want to see other methods, only the ones that I can call publicly. Sorry. And so because this is an internal method of the Azure function, it is marked as internal. But then, in order to see that in the unit test project, you need to mark the assembly using internals visible to and the name of the test project, so you can see it in the test project. Once you have that in place, then you should be able to see the internal method from the test project. And then, as I was saying before, I start always with a blank unit test, and the very first thing I'm checking is that because unit test is supposed to create a contact, then the verification step should be that it should exist a contact at the end of the execution. So what I'm doing is that I'm using late bound to keep it simple. You could use early bound as well, of course. So yeah, as you can see, this is just checking that it should exist at least one contact at the end of the unit test. And if you run it like this, it will fail because the method I was showing you earlier is obviously blank. It has nothing. Now we want to go a bit further and add async operations because the latest database client supports async interface, which is ideal because the whole Azure function runs asynchronously. But testing async methods with XUnit is super easy. Like you just add the async and the task as a return type. And then in the unit test, you also put async in the unit test. and then you should be able to test the unit test asynchronously as well. So, for example, in this case, I added some extra steps at the beginning to call that method I was showing you earlier, and make sure that once that function is executed, that it should create a contact and that it should have some properties that were received in the jar function. This test is still failing because the associated method hasn't been implemented yet at this stage, which is something we do now. So when I implement the unit test, the create contact method, then I can, if I run the test, it will succeed because now that method is creating a new contact with the expected parameters, and as you can see, is doing it using the new asynchronous interface as well. So basically, to recap, and I'm leaving some time for questions because people will have questions, I suppose. But to recap, unit testing is fundamental aspect of the LLM story, increases the pro-dev efficiency, and the point is that you can develop and debug locally many times without hitting an actual Dataverse environment. The things you need to consider now is that version 1 is deprecated. Like we will be putting all the effort in version 2 and version 3 now. Of course, we will be merging the existing pull request and because these were on hold, but basically the effort and focus will be on the newer versions. So you can use version 1 for server-side development on Windows, and you should be able to use version 3 for client-side development in .NET Core. And eventually, when the new Dataverse client NuGet package supports also server-side development, we, at least personally, we want to be in a situation where we can just rely on .NET Core, and so you can develop, for example, on Linux, on Mac OS. And the slides of this demo basically are available on this GitHub repo, and that I'll make available straight after my session and straight after the questions. So I'm leaving like 10 minutes for questions in case you have any, or if you want me to go through something like any questions so far, or So one question from Philip is that .NET 6 is now long-term support and Azure Functions v4 has just been released. Have you had any chance to test with them? Not yet. No, that's something I was saying in the presentation. I didn't try that yet, also mainly because, as far as I know, the Dataverse client is still using 3.1 as the baseline. So I don't know if Microsoft will introduce a .NET 6 as the target framework as well in the package. If that happens, then I'll have a look. But no, I didn't try that yet. No. You can try now when I publish the repo if you want. Any other questions?
Any feature request for adding code coverage, like how Betim showed in his presentation where he created a package, but I believe that is a NuGet package. So once we go cross-platform, so would that be added into FakeXrmEasy at some point?
There are other Visual Studio Code extensions you can use for code coverage as far as I know. And that's why I didn't want to get into details as well. Now, one good thing I'll show you actually, let me open up this for you, is that I'm using Sonar. Personally, I'm using Sonar, and when you now every pull request will run through the quality gates, and you can see so people who are contributing to the project can see the code coverage in the Sonar Cloud environment as well. This is not yet public because the repo is still private, but once I make it public, you should be able to see it. And for example, if I go to, I don't know, core, see full analysis, main branch, you have the code coverage metrics in here, and you can browse and see. You have drill down, you have uncovered lines, the code coverage at the line level and at the branch level conditions, as you could have branch code coverage. And so now you should be able to see. That's why I didn't put much effort on. The report generator that Betim was showing was actually used in the previous version of FakeXrm. So whenever a NuGet package was pushed, you could see the code coverage right inside the repository, because I was pushing as well the HTML files that were generated by the report generator. But for this one, I wanted to try Sonar, also because Sonar has just much more. So and it comes with a plan for free tier for open source projects. Not right now, I was paying for this, but once it's public, it should be free of charge as well. Any other questions? Is there support for date operators in filter and conditions? Yes, there are date operators. Let me show you on the current version 1, but condition operator, for example. And these are there was a list. Yeah, there are many data operators, like, for example, within this week, last 7 days, next 7 days, things like that, they are supported, yes. And not all of them. There was some pull requests outstanding to merge some of those, but quite a lot of them, yeah, there is support. What else? And
there is one question from Devi. His question is, he has not used FakeXrmEasy yet, but then does FakeXrmEasy methods, which supports create or update, does it actually create a record in Dataverse?
Good question. So no. So the whole point is not to not hit the Dataverse environment at all. So any data, test data that is created, updated, deleted, it only stays in memory, in the memory of the process that is executing the test. Whenever the test completes, there won't be any data in the Dataverse environment. That's why they are repeatable, because you can repeat this as many times as you want. They won't leave any kind of trash data in the Dataverse environment. So you can always start from the very same status, and you can repeat as many times as you want. So no, it's not creating any data. There is another class which is called XRM Real Context. I use that mainly for things when I was this one as well, but that's I don't use it much, to be honest. This XRM Real Context class, this one has a actual connection string you can use to connect to a target environment. This is something I created to maybe do some integration testing, but I put so much focus on unit testing that I didn't extend it much. But there is some method that may be handy. That is that you can grab for example, when you're debugging a plugin in a target environment, you can grab the plugin profile, the plugin execution context, copy and paste that context locally, and then we'll run you can debug the plugin locally, like but with the same data you had in the Dataverse environment. That's something I did that was useful when you need to troubleshoot a plugin that with some edge cases you didn't think of, yeah. But that's it pretty much. I just prefer to rely on as much as possible on the memory data, because it's way faster and it doesn't create test data that you then need to clean up, and it's way more efficient. The more thing you can bring locally, the better. That's the whole value of this product, open source product. What is the best way to save the mockup data? So there is an initialize method. Let me see if I can find a sample. Not just initialize. You can initialize metadata as well, but you want the actual data. There is a method you can call to set up the initial test data you need for running the test, and then that basically receives a list of, like this one, for example. Initialize. You know, this one basically initialize the memory data so that it only has 2 contexts, and then because for the point of view of the piece of code that you need to test, you only need 2 contexts. There's no need to actually create hundreds or thousands of records. But your unit testing, you only need the minimum amount of data to unit test that piece of functionality. Nothing more, nothing less. So this is the method you can use to set up initial data if you wanted to. And so whenever this runs, it's like you had a database in Dataverse with only 2 contexts. Amazing. What else?
There's a question from Philip saying, can virtual entity data providers be used with FakeXrmEasy or injected into a pipeline?
Yeah, this was something that was added by in a pull request setting somewhere. But I didn't. Let me actually check. I think entity. I cannot find it now, but I'll double check, and then once I find it, I'll post the answer on the chat window. But yeah, there was something added where you could specify virtual entity providers, and that's what I'm not sure if it was merged in the end in version 1 or not. If not, I'll take a look, and then definitely we will bring that into the two new versions as well. Added by, yes, exactly, by Pok. Yeah. Oh, by the way, Pok is in Vietnam. He was messaging me before the session, because he was looking forward to attend my session. But it's amazing because the commitment by the people, because it's like, right now it's like 3 a.m. in Vietnam. So yeah, but yeah, thanks to him as well. Any other questions?
There's another question from Evo, and his question is around in version 2, is it possible in version 2 with Pipeline Simulator to register a plugin, create update with their filtering attributes of pre-image for pre and post plugins?
Yeah, so in version 1, the big limitation was that the pipeline simulation, because of that coupling with the actual messages, it was only possible to do it for create, update, delete. Now with the pipeline simulation, it will run for every request. So you can even trigger a plugin on, say, whenever a custom action runs, for example. The thing is that you can also specify the plugins that will run for these steps, but right now you have to do it manually. I'll think about a way of automating it in a better way, but you have to do it manually. You have to go in code and say, for example, this plugin will run on the pre-creates of this entity, for example. And it doesn't support images yet, but I'll be looking at introducing those as well. So yeah. Any other questions? I'm just trying to follow up the chat window.
Yeah. Does it support custom API?
Should be able to. I didn't try yet, but should be able, because now we can run pretty much every request, so that's kind of a layer on top. So that's something I want to try next. But yeah, it should be possible. Not a big deal. Oh, there was one question as well by Phil Cole, I think it was, that I think it was like, sorry, Phil, trying to cut with all the questions by Phil Cole alone.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I found his question. His question is, do you have any amazing ideas on unit testing cloud flows?
Yeah,
that's kind of interested.
that's what I wanted to add. Yeah, that's a whole beast. I don't know. I'll see what I can do, but yeah, it won't be small. But right now, no. I'll think about it. Yeah.
Yeah. If there are any other questions, please post them in the chat so Jordi can get to those and answer them for you.
Yeah, custom API is the same as the custom action, as the team was saying, and you can. Let me actually show you.
Yeah, but I just recently found that it also supports Expando type of entities. So so that's something would be different than custom actions. How we were having custom actions. So that's why I asked that question.
Okay, you mean Expando entities as kind of the input of the request?
It's input of the request, yeah, but without any entity type associated.
Okay, I get you now. Yes, yeah, no, yeah, it should be possible. It shouldn't be a big deal to do that. Definitely way easier than implementing Flow unit tests.
That's right.
And just in relation to the custom APIs, I wanted to show you something actually real quick from the. I think I had it on these slides. Let me just jump in, find it. Yeah, from this one. So this one, as you can see, in relation to the custom APIs and to the custom actions, these are generic fake message executors. This is meant to be used to add custom actions that don't have an associated early bound organization request type. For example, this might be useful for late bound custom actions. You can use this extension method to automatically discover this kind of generic fake message. And also, someone sent a contribution to be able to use generic fake message. So generic fake messages are the things that you want to request that don't have a type in the SDK. And you could use this, well, at least some of the developer who sent a pull request, submitted a pull request, was using this also to even test out of the box messages that are internal and you're not supposed to consume from the SDK and support the things. But anyway, it's there. So I'll use that. If I need to extend the expando objects, then that will go into that place probably. Any other questions?
Eduardo has a suggestion that don't we think that word mock should be more familiar for people who are new to Dataverse? They are coming into like from .NET background and diving into Dataverse.
I kind of get the idea, but so now with Power Apps available to a wider audience, some people should ask why there is not any mock framework. So you mean there's no any mock framework for like Canvas apps, for example? Is that the question, like Eduardo? Because there is framework for the Dataverse client and things like that. So I don't know what you mean exactly.
Yeah, I think what he meant is instead of using word fake, probably mock is more familiar. I guess it's.
Yeah, in the end, so when I added FakeXrmEasy that it has main dependency on FakeXrmEasy, everything in the end, everything are mocks. FakeXrmEasy doesn't call it. Okay. Sorry, FakeXrmEasy doesn't call it mocks. It's just everything are fakes because to keep it simple. But yeah, I mean, kind of agree. Yes.
Yeah, probably a tag on the repository with mock may yield some results. So whenever people are searching for mock on GitHub, then FakeXrmEasy is shown as an option.
Okay, let me check because I think I had mock as a key as a label. Yeah, mock. So
Interesting.
interesting. Anyway,
I think the Dataverse is what is missing over there. So that's why the results that Eduardo was searching was with mock Power Apps or mock Dataverse.
Okay. Yeah.
And Dataverse is not in that tag. So probably that's why it's not yielding any result.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I'll add Dataverse as a tag probably as well. Yes, I had definitely had Dataverse mentioned in the new repos I'm about to make public. But yeah, good point.
Yeah, and that would be a good suggestion. I mean, it would be easier
to
search.
Any other questions so far? I wanted to, because I had so much stuff to announce, I wanted to leave plenty for questions just in case. So
yeah, no, this is really great. I mean, with the new Dataverse support, Dataverse SDK support for .NET Core, and you releasing with this Core support as well. I think so. I'm looking forward for working with Core. I haven't had opportunity myself to work on .NET Core yet, but with where Microsoft direction is going, I think so that would become the future. Yeah. So really looking for that, and I think so. You're like some tools are sometimes behind whenever the feature is released, but I feel like you and the community keep this FakeXrm so up to date all the time. Like even if the new features are released, it's already in the tool. That makes things so much easy for developers to go and test their things and not wait for the features to be released. So really great work, Jordi.
Thanks.
Really, I mean,
thanks.
Community and the team and everyone.
I really appreciate that, and also all the developers who had submitted pull request and made contributions as well. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Well, thank you, Jordi. So guys, we'll take a minute break, and then the next presentation is from Alex Schlega from Canada. So let me give him the presenter rights and let me set up the teams.